Hey out there, welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal. And today we have a guest that I'm so thrilled to talk to you about. Her name is Sade Dumas. Hello, Sade.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I understand you live in New Orleans.
Yes,
And I can you tell me which neighborhood?
I live in Mid-City, so I'm
In
right in the middle of all of it, but I grew up downtown in the Lower Ninth Ward, so I'm a downtown girl at heart.
a downtown girl. Uh, so Mid City is such a wonderful area. If I've actually lived in the same home for 38 years, but if I were to move, that's where I would move.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
it's a
it's
lovely
lovely.
neighborhood, and as the name implies, Mid City, you're in the middle, and everything is close.
Yes,
Yeah.
everything.
I,
It's great
I'm
central location.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous. So now I'm very familiar with your work, but some of our listeners out there might not. So I'm just going to tell them just a little bit about you before we start. Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay. Here we go. Oh, may I call you Sade?
Absolutely.
Okay. As a community activist and organizational leader, Sade Dumas has worked closely with other allies and stakeholders in order to, one, improve conditions of confinement in the New Orleans jail, two, advocate for evidence based methods to reduce incarceration, and three, to promote alternatives to arrests. That's all wonderful. Sade has led many decarceration initiatives, resulting in, get this, an over a 50% decline in the New Orleans jail population. That's remarkable. Sade is now Spark Justice Fund Director at Borealis Philanthropy. Her goal is to fiscally and holistically support organizations working to address the drivers of incarceration. That's all wonderful and very, very much needed work, not only in New Orleans, but throughout the country. So thank you for your hard work. And please tell our listeners a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I'll go from the beginning. This work touches me really personally. I grew up in New Orleans when we incarcerated 5 times higher than the national average. So there were about 6,500 people in our jail. So New Orleans is a really small place. If you've been here, you know you can drive everywhere within 15 minutes if there are no accidents, because we are also not the best drivers out here. Um, but, I grew up in a New Orleans where incarceration was the norm. We were the most incarcerated city in the most incarcerated state in the most incarcerated country.
I
I have a
remember
brother.
that statistic. I remember hearing that
Yeah.
statistic.
And so I have a brother who's in prison. And the justice system is not always just. Sometimes it is about who has the fiscal resources to get out. My previous partner was also or is also formerly incarcerated. So this touches me closely. But I will say, as someone who grew up with this being the norm, I did not know it was a problem until college. So a lot of times when people hear other people's experiences, that's when they can figure out it's a problem. But when someone's so desensitized to it, it's a little trickier. So it took me going to Tulane University, studying sociology, looking at crime and human development, looking at race relations, and seeing that Black people are doing the same things at the same rate of everyone else, but we are disproportionately impacted by mass incarceration. It also took me that to see the tie-in with mass incarceration and how we have to look at crimmigration, because over the years, advocates in Louisiana have done a great job of closing just inhumane jail facilities, and now they're being reopened and used as ICE facilities. So it's not really liberation, it's not really fairness if we're liberating one group of people and then we have another group of people being caged for seeking safety. But after looking at the numbers, I first met Bruce Riley at Voice of the Experience, Vote. Vote is an amazing statewide organization that has done work to allow formerly incarcerated people the right to vote, to wield their power. And I met Annie Freitas, who is now at Loyola University leading some critical criminal justice reform work there. And I started as a GED tutor for formerly incarcerated women. And I did a lot of things around that time, but more related to criminal justice reform. I eventually started leading that GED clinic for formerly incarcerated women as the program director. I also traveled across the state with organizers with Voice of the Experience to let them know about mass incarceration, why this is a problem, how a few days in jail could totally ruin someone's life. So, and I was on the steering committee of the
And their
Arlene's
families.
and their
And their
families
families. Yes.
and their families. And I was on the steering committee of the Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition. While doing all of that, my day job, my day job was a parent educator at Tulane School of Social Work. I'm at Tulane's medical school. I'm going to redo that. While doing that, my day job was a parent educator at Tulane's medical school. So what I witnessed there was a lot of single moms who had gone to jail for an unpaid fine or fee. And the collateral consequences of incarceration are so huge. So just a few days in jail could cause someone to lose their job because that's a no call, no show. If people are living paycheck to paycheck, it causes them to lose their homes. And most importantly, it causes people to lose their children to the DCFS system.
So it's like
And
this trying to think of the word. It's like it has this ripple effect. It's like a catastrophic ripple effect.
it impacts the whole family. And if our
Right.
families aren't doing well, then our communities can't do well. So I'm in this for families. I worked with parents who their children were traumatized from this experience, and they had to tell their children, I'll never leave you again. I'm not going to leave. Mommy's here. But mommy never left. Mommy was ripped away for an unpaid fine or fee, not because this person posed a risk to public safety, not because this person physically hurt someone, but because they were poor.
A little bit of money.
A little bit of money. And they had to work to find another job that's going to work around their case plan. They had to work to find stable housing because you can't get your children back without housing. And that, along with seeing the numbers, seeing moms not have the opportunity to like be there for their children all the way, seeing that separation is what made me say, this is my calling. This is what I have to look at full time because family is the most important thing to me. And I think our society is strong when our families are strong. Our families can be strong when the parents are healed and whole and can provide safe environments for their children. Now, I won't go on a tangent because we know people need living wages and other things for a safe community. But more on track with this, I think I really got fully into the work when a position opened with the Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition. I started as a coordinator and ended up being the executive director. So, a little bit about that organization. It started in 2004 when there were a lot of people running for the sheriff race in New Orleans, including former Sheriff Marlon Gusman. The coalition did work to let everyone in the community know the role of the sheriff, and they created this amazing 9-point platform, which Marlon Gusman at that time signed on to. Marlon Gusman won that race shortly after Hurricane Katrina came. So the group separated quite a bit at that moment. After Hurricane Katrina, about 5 years after, so 2010-9, there was a threat of rebuilding the jail the same size. So this new jail was built years later, but the original size that they wanted to rebuild it at with FEMA dollars to replace the Katrina damaged jail buildings were 6,000 beds. And it took amazing stakeholders, people from Vera, people from Voice of the Experience, Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition, Women with a Vision, all of these groups came together in this coalition and said, we don't want the future of New Orleans to look the way it has in the past. We don't want to over incarcerate people. We don't want to put people in jail for petty offenses. And so a campaign started, and it led to the mayor creating a working group. That working group recommended the cap of the jail at 1438. And that was one of the
Down from
biggest.
6,000?
Yes, yes, that was the.
1438. Interesting
Yes.
number, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah. Now, did the sheriff always follow that? No, and that's where I come in. So one of the first things I did, um, in the role at OPPRC was I led a lawsuit against former Sheriff Marlon Gusman, who illegally opened a temporary detention center to house people in that jail. So in his mind, we have more people. We should put them in this jail. We should illegally open this jail building. So I worked with partners to file a lawsuit against him for violating land use law in the city, but we know litigation is not enough. We know that sometimes our elected officials donate to judges are elected officials, so they donate to campaigns, and there's a lot of smoke within that. But while doing that, we organized. So we organized the city council to pass a lower cap at 1250. And we also looked at other methods to decarcerate, because there's the cap, but what's the mechanism to make sure people don't go into that building? Some of the other work that we did, there's the phase 3 jail expansion that's still on the table. So Sheriff Marlon Gusman wanted to open a 700 bed psychiatric jail under the guise of mental health care. Now we know jail is like a super traumatizing environment. Yes, exactly. Jail is super traumatizing.
For those of you who couldn't see me, this is a podcast. I put in quotation marks. I understood that Sade was saying it was under the cloak of mental health care, the disguise, the facade, but that's not what it was really going to be, you felt.
Absolutely. So the community fought to get those numbers down. The first big chunk down was 150 beds. The last chunk down we got to this final proposal right now was 89 beds, but we've been fighting for a long time to delay it and to have 0 beds in the New Orleans community. But the truth is, with organizing, there are wins and losses. So I am hoping and praying that our elected officials can wake up and invest in alternatives to incarceration and community-based psychiatric care instead of a jail. But truthfully, the work of many people over the years is why the proposal is now 89 instead of 700. Because if we have 700 beds and we have to pay for a facility of that size, each dollar we spend in the carceral system is a dollar that we can't spend for early childhood education, which will lead to a safer community every time, an investment in early childhood education.
Absolutely. So I have so many questions. I don't know where to start, but before that, are you at a point in your conversation where you can take questions, or is there anything else you'd like to share at this point?
Whatever works. There are a lot of campaigns I can talk about. So, but I can take that. I can do that after questions.
Okay.
Because there are campaigns that led to me leaving. When I left OPPRC earlier this year, the jail population was around 850. And that was a lot of decarceration work done during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good. That's good, right? Did I understand that right? Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, because this is a topic that I'm pretty confident in saying this, that most people just don't think about. The majority of people don't think about this issue and why it's an issue. Believe it or not, I've been thinking about it a long time. As I'm a civic activist, and one of my idols, who's passed away now, but her name is Frances Crowe. And I spoke to her when she was in her late 80s. And I asked her, how many times have you been arrested? And her response was, not enough times. Because arrest, as a civic activist, is not unusual. This particular woman, she was anti nuclear energy. Okay, remember she passed away in her 90s. Even though a lot of people think nuclear energy was safe, she never did think it was safe. So I at that moment I felt as an inferior human being. I've never been arrested.
Yeah.
But I also know that to be arrested means you have to go to jail. And I'll be honest, I didn't have the confidence that Ms. Crow had about being arrested and going to jail. She felt she needed to be arrested more. And to be honest, I was petrified by the thought of being arrested and going to jail in New Orleans. So could you share with our listeners what, what going to jail, that experience is ideally? Let's say, for example, I've been threatened with arrest for standing up against new oil leases in the Gulf. And I watched the police come in there with their long tapes, 3 feet long zip tapes. They don't use the metal handcuffs anymore. They use plastic, and they make it really, really tight. So I was actually worried I might be arrested that day. So if you could share with our listeners what a proper arrest should be like for someone like me, an activist who was just trying to do a peaceful protest.
Yeah. So it really varies in New Orleans. One, I'll say yes, going to jail is a scary thing anywhere, but especially in New Orleans. The reason we're under a consent decree is because our jail was so dangerous, so deadly. From 2005 until 2021, there were about 70 deaths under the previous sheriff, right? And so that is a scary thing. And we know conditions were even worse for women. We know that the consent decree is also there because of lack of medical care, because like all type of things happened. And that's just deaths. That doesn't, we're not talking about use of force. We're not talking about people being brutally beaten and like sexually assaulted and all the other horrendous things that happen in jail. So I just want to affirm, yes, it is scary, the thought of being arrested, especially in the New Orleans jail. But it varies. So our police department has come a long way and has a long way to go, but they've come a long way to the point where now typically they would bring protesters to the jail. They would book them or charge them, but they would release them. But if it's the state police, sometimes that looks differently because it's state charges. And so that it's not as easy of a release. But this is the important thing about community solidarity. No one activist can change their community. You can light a spark, you can charge people up, you can give people information, but it takes mutual aid and power building to really win these fights. It takes resources. If someone is in jail, you have to get them out. So what does that look like?
Money.
What is it called? Yeah. What do they call it? Is it crowdsourcing? I always forget the term. Where you like
crowdfunding, I think.
Crowdfunding. Yeah. It takes that, and it takes trusting that your community will have your back. And I wonder if, this is a segue to talk about some of the campaigns and some of the things I went through. So just a few other campaigns that happened over the years. There was a 1250 cap in 2019. I always forget these years. COVID has just meshed everything together in my life. At the start of the pandemic, I worked with other groups to have judges pass an en banc order to release people from jail who pose no risk to public safety, because the truth is jails are incubators for infectious diseases. So like COVID-19, no mask. We didn't know what we were dealing with as a country, and we knew that that was not a safe place. That en banc order did not go far enough. So we worked with groups to have a summons ordinance passed so that people would get a summons to come to court as opposed to being brought to jail during the pandemic for crimes that pose no or little threat to public safety.
Bravo.
Because if the public safety, our criminal justice system is about public safety. Why are there bodies in there of people who don't pose a threat to me or you? Why are they there? Is it really about safety? It's probably a lot more than that. Also, there were the uprisings in the summer. Amazing, brave, courageous activists in New Orleans led protesters to walk across the bridge or an elevated expressway, and police officers tear gassed them on that bridge. On that bridge, they tear gassed them. And this came the day after police officers knelt down and said, "We're with you. We're in solidarity with you." Mm-hmm. So they were on the news praised for kneeling with the protesters one day. The very next day, they tear gassed them and blocked all of the exits. Someone could have fallen over. Someone could have been killed. So I knew I had work to do that night. The city council was set to praise the police for their conduct with protesters. I quickly created a Facebook event. Within hours, we had hundreds of public comments to come into the city council. You should not pass this. You should not praise the police. You should ban tear gas against peaceful protesters. And because of all of this, and the courageous leadership of Jay Banks, who was on the city council, he said, if tear gas is banned with some international war codes, then we shouldn't use it on our people here. We shouldn't use it on our protesters. So a lesson is elected officials don't know everything in the same way that we don't. We have to educate each other in the movement, because that led to him creating an ordinance that was passed to ban the use of tear gas against peaceful protesters in New Orleans.
Fantastic.
So that's huge. Yeah.
Fantastic. I remember that incident, Sade. And if I believe I recall, they also used rubber bullets.
Yes.
Rubber bullet, which if it hits you in the shoulder, it's fine. But what if it hits you in the eye?
Yeah.
So, bravo, girl. That is amazing, and I know you didn't do it alone. I understand that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it was you who put up that Facebook page.
Yeah. And it took a long time because I am not tech savvy, but
well, you are now.
Yeah, kind of. Do what you can for the movement. And
right.
Another part of that with the police work, and this work was not, started by me as far as looking at the city budget, but I'm always thinking of what is my part in the movement. Everyone has a part in the movement. If your favorite thing is to bake cookies, we need cookies on a protest route. Like, we get really hungry, if your skill is, if you love children, holding the kid circle and childcare during membership meetings, there's a way for every single person. If you love to drive, carpooling. If you love to text, which is not my thing, if you love to texting people and say, "Hey, are you coming to this meeting?" Outreach. And I say all of this to show that everyone has a part in the movement. And so for me, it was, what is the direct tie I can see to the jail population in my role? And what I thought about was, at that time, over 75% of people in the jail had a mental health, a psychiatric disorder. And there's this threat of building this new phase 3 psychiatric jail. So my mind was, how do we divest from this? How do we use the Black Lives Matter movement? How do we use the Black Lives Matter movement? How do we use the uprisings that are saying, invest in our communities, we need help, to progress this movement? So we started this series, Care Over Cops, and we educated people about what's in the city budget. How much are we spending on jails, police, the courts? Are these reactive measures? What are proactive things we can do? We know if people have homes, public safety goes up, right? And so there was one about houselessness, one about restorative justice. And there were two more, but the restorative justice one is what stands out to me most, because frankly, I was scared to touch that topic. It took the membership saying, we have to talk about what happens when something does go wrong, when someone does hurt someone, because that happens in society. We're humans. We're not perfect. Sometimes humans do really bad things, really hurtful things, but how do we deal with that? So we had Troy Boucher, who leads amazing restorative justice work in New Orleans, come in and talk about restorative circles and talk about how do we integrate people into society after harm has been done so we can stop these generational curses, so we can stop the cycle of putting people in jail and that being modeled for the children and not having a parent at home and just creating this cycle. Um, and that was just such an eye opener. So that led to our campaign to create a non-police crisis response team, which the task force for that just ended last month. I was one of the co-chairs, and New Orleans will have a non-police crisis response team really soon. And that's really going to be instrumental in making sure that people in distress are not met with handcuffs and cops, that they're met with help. It's help, not handcuffs. So there are so many ways to chip away at the prison industrial complex. Last week, I looked at this calendar, the calendar of causes. Each week and each month there's something. So there's like anti-poverty week in January. There's abolition of slavery day, there's Pride Month, there are all of these things. And when I look at this, incarceration touches all of it. April, Earth Day, environmental justice. How are prisons impacting our land?
And
And
these
so,
are, if I may jump in just for a few seconds, Sade has touched on something so incredibly important. She can bring up her mission and her message, and there's lots of things she can connect it to. There's lots of coat trees you can hang your mission on. That you just have to look. You just have to look. Sade, she looked at a calendar, but but those coat trees are out. That's, I think of a coat tree and hanging a hat on it. But like, oh, I can hang my hat there and there and there, and all of these are opportunities to keep your message out there. And there's never enough. There's never enough ways. There's never enough. Or there's never too many. Excuse me. There's never too many.
yeah. And
Never
it
too
also
many.
creates pathways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're all fighting these issues and we're not coming together as a collective to build power across these issues, this is going to be a very long, very tiring fight. And I don't know if we'll ever get there if we don't come together. So it's really about working in solidarity, which doesn't mean you work on every issue, but it does mean you bring more people into the fight because in movements, people move. I've moved from organizing community to now organizing resources. I still consider myself an organizer in philanthropy. I'm organizing these resources to get to folks on the ground. I'm organizing holistic support for leaders. I'm organizing capacity building, technical assistance, helping other groups across the country do what was done in New Orleans. But, I say all of that to say, meet people where they are. Some people may not care about the human rights aspect, unfortunately, of the jail. But if I go to certain neighborhoods, I can say, okay, in New Orleans, look at these potholes. But yeah, they're building another jail. So I guess these potholes will get worse and your car's going to be ruined. Right. And so unfortunately, some people only care about the economic part of it, speak their language. Some
Well,
people only care about the racial justice part of it, speak their language.
on that subject, there are you can't let that bother you. Yes, people are worried. Dale Carnegie once said most people are worried about what they're doing in the next 10 minutes, what they're doing in the next 24 hours, and what they're doing in the next 7 days. But fortunately, not everybody's like that. I want to congratulate you, Sade, right in the beginning of this conversation. You already started naming names of other people who were instrumental in working with you, either by volunteering or they have organizations of their own. And that's really a great thing. And it's very, very important. Acknowledging the help and assistance and your allies and your coalitions as you do your work. There's nothing more precious, there's nothing more priceless than people who have volunteered their time and skills for a mission. So I want to congratulate you on doing that. And then later in our conversation, you mentioned another name. take note of that, all you folks out there who are looking to take on the big guys in your communities. Cherish your volunteers and be sure to acknowledge them and be sure to say their names out loud. And not only is there individual volunteers, but coalitions as well. If you have a website, put the names of your allied organizations up on your website and your allied individuals. But I did have another question for you. I noticed that you filed lawsuit, which is a tool. I'm a tool for activists. I've filed lawsuits many, many times in my work, holding the Army Corps of Engineers to account, but it was always to get them to respond to a request for information or to get them to just answer a question. It was never to, people think lawsuit, they think you want money. Lawsuit is a tool at your disposal. So can you talk a little bit about that? Now, did you have an attorney help you with this? And could you elaborate a little bit on your lawsuit, please?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So I am not an attorney. We absolutely had an attorney to help us with this. And, the focus was really a violation of land use. Now, we knew we weren't going to win in the courts, which we didn't. But the strategy was, how can we use this to further reduce the jail population? And so just because you may not win something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Sometimes you figure out how to make that work in your favor. So there were many people. There was Don Everard, who is a founding member of Hope House, one of the groups that sits within Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition. Norris Henderson would vote. Yvette Thierry, like all of these people who were bold enough to say, I want my name on this paper because the jail impacts me. You also have to think about standing. So who were our members who lived around that jail building that was reopened without following the zoning law that we could put on that lawsuit? Because in all ways, the other side is looking for ways they could strike us out. In movement spaces, do you have standing for this? In philanthropy, do you have the paperwork right? How can we tell the IRS you're doing something wrong? So, we do have to be really careful with these movements, because the other side is looking for technicalities, right? To take us out, but we're bigger than that. And get your lawyer friends involved, get the law interns involved. Again, we all have a place in the movement.
And I've found that in addition to that, the only thing I can add to that is often an attorney will volunteer pro bono, or there may be an organization in your town like the Tulane Law Clinic here in New Orleans, where they have law professors and law students offering their expertise pro bono to would-be activists out there trying to beat the big guys in their communities. So, and tap into those resources, because again, a lawsuit can be a very, very effective tool in your work. So before I forget, I'm so excited about the introduction of a non-police response unit to I imagine things like domestic problems, or people calling about there's noise in the neighborhood or something. I guess nonviolent problem. Well, domestic could be violent. I'm sorry, but something like a second line going down your neighborhood, and then often the police are called in for people just having a parade. A fun parade. So when is this? I'm so excited about this, and I haven't heard about it. I haven't heard about it in the newspapers or on the radio. So when is this going to start approximately?
So the contract should be signed soon with the city. The task force just ended about 21 days ago. And we sent those recommendations to the city council. So it won't cover domestic violence. I mean,
no, it shouldn't. No.
The truth with advocacy is you have to chip away. You have to chip away as much as you can. You have to sometimes prove that this thing can work before there are other things added to it. So right now, let's say you saw someone who wasn't being violent to anyone walking up the street, unclothed.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
okay, that's an example.
That's big, right? Like we have children around, or whatever. Like maybe that's not what something, but it could also be an indicator of something bigger.
Right.
We know if the police shows up, police are trained to assess and arrest. That's their training. We
Mm-hmm.
can't expect them to
Mm-hmm.
act outside of that training. But mental health workers, peer support specialists, they're trained in a different way. They're oriented in a different way. They're oriented to inquire, be curious, seek resources. And so we can't expect people who are trained to arrest to act differently because that's their training. That's what's on their what do you call it, job description, right? And so the problem that we're facing right now in society is we've put all of the duties under the police. We have police acting as social workers. So many schools in New Orleans, they have taken the social workers out and put law enforcement officers. They're not equipped to deal with psychiatric needs, right? And so I'm excited about when this launches.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And I think it's going to be really huge with helping people and meeting them where they are and keeping people outside of the carceral system.
And this needs to be in the news. I mean, people need to know about this. I
Yeah.
personally think this is just very, very exciting. And I really am looking forward to hearing more about that. Sade, is there anything else? We're about run out of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. I wonder if there's time to talk a little bit about the sheriff race in New Orleans. There's a new sheriff in town.
Actually, I was thinking more in terms of advice for our listeners as they take on the big guys in their communities.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, because we're
Um,
about run out of time.
okay. Um, so my advice is know your people and find your people. Don't be afraid to take risks and have a safety plan. Have a safety plan. Have a safety plan. I'm saying that 3 times because I just last year did not feel that I was doing work big enough for any attacks. But attacks can come. So what's important is to know who are the people you can call. What do you do in an emergency? Have a safety plan that's not on a digital device because surveillance is real. Um, use things like Signal. Don't text your safety plan, right? But I'm really big on safety because I know it's a concern for many people. But their philanthropy helps out sometimes, right? And also your community helps out. So yeah, the big thing is build power, build community, and that's how we win.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sade. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful having you. There's just tons of great advice for our listeners today. Thank you again, and thank you to the listeners. I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me.